Hola? What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
You know that specific kind of silence that falls over a room when something valuable is about to be destroyed? Not loud, not dramatic, just a stillness, like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for the crack. That's how it felt the moment my cousin Tessa looked at me, wide-eyed and all faux sincere, and said, "Alyssa, I know this is a huge ask, but I need your blue Galliano for tonight. Please, I'll be so careful." And that word, careful, rattled in my ears, like the first warning bell in a disaster movie. She showed up at my place around 5, smelling like expensive perfume layered over desperation. One of those scents you recognize instantly because it clings to people who are always in some kind of mess they swear they didn't cause. Her hair was still damp from a hasty shower, and she kept glancing down at her phone like she was on a countdown. Like something big was about to happen, and I was just the last stop on her runway prep. I hadn't seen her in weeks, maybe months, but she waltzed in like we'd had brunch just yesterday, hugging me too tight, laughing a little too loud, and immediately wandering toward my wardrobe like it was some boutique she had every right to browse. Now here's the thing about me. I'm not precious about most stuff. You want my books? Take them. Kitchen gear? Sure, just bring it back clean. But that dress, that specific navy blue, silk chiffon Galliano with the barely there back, and the structured neckline that made even me, with my never quite right shoulders, feel like a damn sculpture. That was different. It wasn't just a dress, it was the only piece of fashion I'd ever saved for, tracked for months online, fought for in an auction, and finally purchased after closing a campaign that took every drop of charm and caffeine I had. I'd worn it only once, to an industry gala where I'd stood beside people whose last names were brands. And even then, I treated it like royalty, walking slowly, sitting carefully, never eating anything remotely oily. That dress meant something to me. And yet here was Tessa, 28, all fake innocence and urgent flirting, spinning some tale about a last-minute date with someone really important. Someone she couldn't mess this up with. Someone who only ever saw her in jeans, and she just wanted to feel beautiful for once. The thing is, she always knows exactly which nerves to press. She plays the little sister angle hard, batting her lashes, touching your arm, making you feel like you're the only one who can rescue her from some vague, emotional cliff. And like a fool, I stood there, arms crossed, looking at that dress in my closet and imagining how good it would feel to say no, and then heard myself say, "Just this once, and you don't leave this house in it. You change in the guest room, on carpet, no food, no smoke, no sex, no sitting on anything sticky, no clubs, no—" And she was already hugging me before I finished the list, her voice a chorus of thank you, thank you, thank you, muffled by the collar of my sweater. She changed upstairs. I heard the zipper slide, the click of her heels, the moment of stillness when she looked at herself in the mirror and let out one of those breathy, triumphant sighs like she had just been crowned. She came down slowly, and I'll admit, I understood why she wanted the dress. It fit her like a secret. It made her look composed, expensive, like someone who'd never taken a bus or cried in a public restroom. But behind the elegance, I saw something else in her eyes. Something just a little too triumphant, like this wasn't just about a date. Like she'd won something, claimed it. I didn't like that feeling. She twirled once, checked herself in my hallway mirror, and whispered something about meeting him at a rooftop bar downtown. I asked who he was, and she just smiled and said, "It doesn't matter if it doesn't go well, but if it does, you'll be my maid of honor." She was halfway out the door when she turned back and asked if I had a nude clutch she could borrow too. I gave her one. Not because I wanted to, because it was easier than arguing. That's how she works. She left behind a haze of rose-scented body spray and chaos. The kind of chaos you don't notice right away, but always reveals itself later. In missing items, in mixed-up stories, in a sense that someone's playing a game with rules they wrote in invisible ink. I spent the rest of that night trying not to think about the dress, trying to read, then clean, then scroll through job emails I didn't want to answer. But something inside me itched the entire evening. a kind of internal alarm that didn't know exactly what it was warning against, just that something was off, that I'd handed over more than just fabric, that I'd given permission for something I wouldn't understand until it was too late. The next morning, at exactly 8:13, my phone buzzed with a message from Tessa. It said, "OMG, last night was wild, thanks again. Dress might need a little love, lol." And something about that tone, that smirk wrapped in text, made my stomach harden into a knot I hadn't felt since I found out my ex had lied about where he was that weekend in Tahoe. I stared at the message for a long time. Didn't answer, just got up, walked to the front door, and looked at the hallway where she'd left the bag. It was there, slouched against the umbrella stand like a corpse, a cheap plastic grocery bag bulging with what I already knew would be a nightmare. And as I reached for it, a single phrase dropped into my mind like a stone. She changed on the porch, right in front of the camera, and I hadn't checked the footage yet. When I say the dress came back ruined, I don't mean a snag or a wrinkle or the kind of wear and tear you could explain away with a dry cleaning tag and a sheepish apology. I mean it was returned in such a disgraceful, unapologetic state that I didn't know whether to laugh at the audacity or scream into a pillow until my lungs gave out. And maybe that's why, when I saw the bag slouched like a drunk at my doorstep, I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, like maybe if I looked long enough, the universe would offer me a less insulting reality, one where that bag held my dress neatly folded, steamed, and maybe even accompanied by a thank you note, or a voucher for the trauma of letting Tessa wear it in the first place. I took it in thal with the kind of reverence one uses for a beloved object that's already been violated, gently unfolding the plastic to reveal a twisted heap of fabric that no longer resembled the sculpture it had once been. And I swear to you, the first thing I noticed wasn't even the rip at the side seam, or the cigarette-burned hem, or the red wine stain that had dried into the silk like a cruel signature. It was the smell, that god-awful mix of club smoke, perfume, someone else's cologne, and what I swear was vomit faint enough to deny, but strong enough to linger long after I dropped the dress on the tile and backed away like it was alive and contagious. My first instinct was to call her, to demand an explanation so thorough and humiliating it would make her think twice before borrowing anything from anyone ever again. But I paused, and something in me, some colder, older part that had learned the hard way not to give people the benefit of the doubt they hadn't earned, told me to wait, to observe, to watch how she handled this, because sometimes silence is a weapon sharper than words, and I was curious whether she'd come to me with some half-hearted apology, or whether she'd pretend the whole thing was no big deal, as if my belongings, my time, my boundaries were all just props in her little performance. I didn't have to wait long. She showed up that afternoon, breezing in like she hadn't turned $1,000 dress into a cautionary tale, holding an iced coffee and wearing sunglasses so big they covered half her face. And when she spotted the dress draped over the back of my dining chair like a dead bird, she had the gall to giggle, not nervously, not out of shame, but with that same airy, bratty energy she used to have when we were teenagers, and she broke my favorite necklace and blamed it on the dog. "Oh no," she said, leaning over the fabric with zero hesitation, like she couldn't smell the disaster clinging to every thread. "That must have happened after dinner. I didn't even notice. But hey, what a night, right? You know how it is." Then she did that thing where she flicked her fingers like she was dismissing a fly and added, "Oops." I felt something twist deep in my gut, something too sharp to be rage and too quiet to be grief. And I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about the dress or even about disrespect. It was about how easily she could shrug off consequences, how completely she had convinced herself that nothing she did ever really mattered unless it affected her directly. And I thought about all the times I'd covered for her, all the lies I'd swallowed on her behalf, and how I used to think that was love, that maybe protecting someone meant letting them get away with everything, even when it chipped away at your sanity one excuse at a time. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You promised to be careful," and she rolled her eyes so hard I could practically hear them scratch against her skull. "Oh, come on," she said, slurping her drink and walking toward my couch like she lived here. It's just a dress. You never wear it anyway. You have a closet full of stuff like this. You're not even going anywhere. What's the big deal? That was the moment I knew. Not just that she was lying, though she clearly was, but that she didn't even respect me enough to pretend otherwise. She didn't even bother to fake remorse, to act like it was an accident worth caring about. She'd gone out, she'd had her night, and whatever collateral damage came from that was someone else's responsibility to clean up. Mine, apparently. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even mention the porch camera, the one she forgot existed, even though she'd changed right in front of it like she was starring in a low-budget reality show. I let her talk, let her ramble about her date, about the drinks, about the hotel bar and the rooftop view, about how he was way more charming than his photos, and how things got intense, and how she wasn't really sure what time she came home, maybe 2, maybe 3, and wasn't that the mark of a good night? She didn't ask me what I thought. She didn't notice I hadn't said a single word in over 5 minutes. She just finished her coffee, left the empty cup on my table like a calling card, and kissed me on the cheek like we were still close, like nothing had changed, like I hadn't just watched her trample all over something I loved. She was halfway down the steps when she turned back and said, "Oh, and if you're mad about the zipper, I think it caught on the car seat or something. I don't know. You can probably get it fixed. Later." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and I stood there, hands clenched, heart still and slow, thinking not just about the dress, but about what she wasn't saying, about the strange tension in her voice when she mentioned her date, about how she'd kept scratching her wrist like something was crawling under her skin, and how she'd never once made eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. There was something else, something she didn't want me to see. And then I remembered the footage, the porch camera, the timestamp, the shape of her silhouette, and I walked upstairs to my laptop like I already knew I wasn't just going to see her leaving for a night out. I was going to see something else, something that would change the entire game. I've always believed that people reveal their truest selves in the quiet moments, the ones they don't know are being watched, when there's no performance left to maintain and no audience to impress, when it's just them and the consequences they assume will never catch up to them. That's why, when I sat down at my desk that night, the ruined dress still spread out behind me like a fallen flag. I didn't feel rage or even hurt anymore. I felt clarity, the sort that only comes when your instincts have been whispering for days and the noise of politeness has finally died down enough for you to hear them screaming. My porch camera isn't fancy, but it's reliable. One of those wide-angle models with grainy night vision and enough frame rate to catch the difference between a friendly wave and a guilty glance. It stores everything in the cloud by default, motion-triggered and time-stamped. And though I rarely review it unless I'm out of town or expecting a delivery, I knew exactly when Tessa had come by, because she'd texted me earlier that afternoon. "Be there in 15. Followed by a heart that felt more like a dart now that I was staring at the footage she never once imagined I'd revisit. I clicked into the archive and scrubbed the timeline backward, watching my own face greet her at the door just before 5, hearing the faint trace of our awkward laughter through the open hallway, and then 10 minutes later, watching her reappear, alone, on the porch. She wasn't in the dress yet, just her casual sweats and flip-flops, holding the garment bag like a prize she'd just snatched from someone too slow to stop her. And then, to my surprise, she didn't leave. She didn't rush off to meet her so-called important date like she'd made it seem. Instead, she set the bag down carefully on the porch bench, checked her phone, and started pacing. Something about the pacing unsettled me. It wasn't nervous energy or the giddy jitters of someone about to be picked up for a romantic evening. It was more like dread. Like she was waiting for a meeting she didn't want to happen, but had no choice but to go through with. She glanced at her reflection in the glass of the door once, adjusted her ponytail, and then, just after 5:30, a car pulled up. Not a sleek sedan or an Uber or anything remotely date-like, but a dusty black pickup with one headlight dimmer than the other, and a dent in the passenger door that made me blink twice. And then I saw him. Tom. I paused the footage, leaned back, and felt something cold unfurl inside me like a vine wrapping around my ribs. Tom, in a hoodie and jeans, looking nothing like the buttoned-up consultant he used to be when we were together, stepped out of the truck and walked up the steps like he owned them. And when Tessa looked at him, it wasn't with excitement or affection or the spark of a new romance. It was wariness, the kind you don't fake. She said something I couldn't hear, gesturing toward the dress bag. And he laughed. Not a kind laugh either. One of those low, smug ones that lands like a slap. They didn't leave together. Not right away. Instead, she followed him into the house. I sat frozen, staring at the timeline as it moved forward, second by second, wondering how I could have missed this, how she could have walked through my space, worn my dress, trashed it, and never once hinted at the fact that she'd used me, not just for an outfit, but as a backdrop to something far messier. 3 hours later, the footage showed him walking out alone, hoodie pulled up, my robe over one arm, my robe, the one I kept in the guest bathroom, the one I hadn't even noticed was missing until that second, and disappearing into the night without looking back. Tessa came out 20 minutes after that, still in the dress, barefoot, clutching her shoes in one hand, and she sat down on the porch steps like she'd just run out of every excuse she'd ever prepared and wasn't sure what came next. That's when she made the call. She didn't know the camera had audio. It only kicks in at close range, only when someone's within a few feet, and she'd sat down directly in front of it, speaking into her phone with a shaky breath and a voice so low I had to replay it 3 times to catch the words. "I swear I didn't know she was his ex," she said, wiping at her face. He didn't tell me until after. He said it was just a joke, that she'd moved on, that it wouldn't matter. There was a pause just long enough to make my skin crawl. Then she added, he said she wouldn't find out, that she was too uptight to check the cameras, that she probably didn't even care about the dress. And then she cried. Not a theatrical cry, not the kind of sobbing you do for sympathy or attention. This was different. Quiet, ragged, the kind of crying you try to bury deep because you know you've done something irredeemable. And for the first time since this mess began, I felt something strange. Not pity, not forgiveness, something murkier. A recognition that whatever had happened between them wasn't entirely what it seemed. But that didn't mean I was going to let her off the hook. Not when she'd lied to my face, dragged my name through her drama, and tried to use my generosity as a stage for some twisted humiliation. Not when she'd let me sit across from her, holding that shredded piece of silk in my hands, and smirked like none of it mattered. No, if she thought I was too uptight to check the cameras, too detached to care, then she'd made a very costly mistake. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. And the next time I saw her, I wasn't going to say a single word about the footage. I was just going to show it, to the right person at the right time, and let the silence do what she never imagined it could. The thing about family is that it teaches you, in small humiliations stretched out over years, how to smile through betrayal, how to sit across from someone who's stolen from you, whether it's a dress, a boyfriend, or a piece of your dignity, and clink mimosa glasses without letting your hand tremble, how to laugh at a story you know is half lie and half larceny, and how to gather every last shard of evidence in silence while everyone else is busy pretending nothing ever happened. And that's exactly what I did in the days following the discovery on my porch camera. I smiled, I texted, I baked lemon scones with poppy seeds from scratch, like some Stepford response to being lied to, and I planned brunch. The guest list was a delicate equation. It had to include just enough tension to keep the edges sharp, but not so much that anyone would suspect the meal had an agenda. Aunt Jean had to be there, of course, because she was the kind of woman who never questioned her daughter's behavior as long as it didn't embarrass her publicly. She played the role of doting mother with Oscar-worthy commitment, but underneath the pearls and passive-aggressive compliments, she was a strategist who knew how to spin a family narrative to protect her own. Lisa, my mutual friend with Tessa, and an accidental witness to more than one of her slip-ups, was also invited, partly because she loved gossip, and partly because she couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it. And of course, Tessa herself, flaky, radiant, lying Tessa, was at the center of it all, having accepted the invitation with a glittery text. Yes, I need some girl time. It's been a week. She had no idea how much of a week it had really been. That Sunday, the weather cooperated like it, too, wanted revenge. Just cloudy enough to feel dramatic, but not so stormy that people would cancel. I set the table on my patio with deliberately mismatched china that gave off the illusion of effortlessness, but had been curated over months. Everything was intentional. The honeycomb butter dish, the cloth napkins with tiny embroidered bees, even the playlist, classic soul, slow and syrupy, had been selected for atmosphere, the kind that encourages secrets to fall out in between bites of frittata and sips of coffee. If I was going to draw blood, I wanted it to look like art. Tessa arrived 15 minutes late, of course, wearing a flowy dress I recognized from a past birthday I hadn't been invited to, and sunglasses so oversized they practically needed a license. She greeted everyone with air kisses and a shriek about how tired she was, how work had been literally insane, and how she just needed this brunch to reset her spirit. I offered her fresh squeezed orange juice, like I hadn't spent the last 48 hours dissecting her betrayal frame by frame, and when she hugged me, the sharp edge of her ring dug into my shoulder, a tiny reminder that even sweetness can leave a mark if you're not careful. The first hour unfolded like any other family gathering. Shallow updates, exaggerated stories, a few glances at phones when the conversation lulled. Tessa played her role beautifully, fielding questions about her latest dating drama with vague little half-truths and throwing in just enough self-deprecating humor to seem harmless. Lisa giggled at everything she said. Aunt Jean nodded with rehearsed concern, and I just watched, smiling, passing dishes, never interrupting. I waited for the perfect moment, and it came just after Lisa asked if anyone had seen that viral video of the woman catching her husband cheating through a doorbell camera. Everyone laughed. Tessa went a little quiet. Her grip tightened on her glass. I leaned forward, just enough to lower the volume of my voice, while raising the weight of my words, and said, "It's amazing what those cameras pick up. Sometimes things you didn't even know you were looking for." The table stilled for a beat, just long enough to register the shift in tone, and then Aunt Jean chirped something about her neighbor's dog being caught stealing the paper, and the tension was brushed away like dust. But I saw the flicker in Tessa's eyes, the recognition, the calculation, the moment she realized she didn't know what I knew. After dessert, while clearing the table, I pulled Lisa aside casually, handed her my phone, and said, "Hey, can you help me figure out if this clip looks weird to you? The audio's a bit low." It was a surgical move, clean and quiet. I didn't explain. I didn't guide her. I just pressed play and let her watch the clip of Tessa, on my porch, dressed like a goddess and crying like a child, whispering about how Tom never told her I was his ex, how she hadn't meant to hurt me, how it all got out of control. Lisa didn't say a word. She just stared at the screen, her jaw tight, her mouth slightly open like a hinge about to snap. And then she looked up at me, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. "That's," she started, but didn't finish. I just nodded. "Yep." I took the phone back without comment, slipped it into my pocket, and returned to the table like nothing had happened. Lisa was quiet for the rest of brunch, which for her was equivalent to setting off an alarm. Tessa noticed. She started glancing over, fidgeting, asking questions she didn't care about the answers to, and by the end of the meal, she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I hugged her goodbye with the same warmth I'd shown everyone else, and even added a little smile when I whispered, "Let me know if you ever want to borrow something again." She pulled back, trying to read my face, but I gave her nothing. Just sunlight and scones, and the illusion that the ground beneath her feet hadn't already begun to crack. That night, my phone buzzed with a series of messages that read like confessions disguised as explanations. First casual, then pleading, then panicked. The last one stayed on my screen longer than the others, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I didn't want to. It said, "You don't understand what he did to me. Please don't tell anyone. I wasn't trying to hurt you." And for the first time, I wondered, not about her guilt, because that was clear, but about what else I didn't know. About what she had walked into that night thinking it was love, or power or maybe just fun. About what Tom had really wanted and why she had cried after. There's a very particular kind of silence that follows exposure, not the dramatic door-slamming kind or the screaming red-face kind, but the quieter, more devastating kind that seeps into people's bones when they realize the version of themselves they've carefully constructed has been shattered by truth, and that everyone else has seen through the cracks. That silence, the kind that hangs just before the fallout begins, is what I was chasing when I chose not to answer Tessa's messages. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I wanted the weight of her own guilt to press against her first, without the cushion of forgiveness or even anger to soften it. I wanted her to sit in the realization that she wasn't just found out, she had been watched, recorded, and then judged by someone who knew exactly what she was doing and decided to wait, quietly, deliberately, for the moment it would hurt the most. It would have been easy to destroy her with that footage in one impulsive motion, to text it to the family group chat, to send it to Aunt Jean with a note saying, "This is what your daughter does in borrowed dresses," to post it anonymously online and let the court of public opinion rip her apart. But I didn't want easy, I didn't want fast, I wanted precision. I wanted her to feel it unfold slowly, to experience the unraveling of her little empire of lies inch by inch, until she could no longer tell where the truth ended and her guilt began. I started with the smallest cut, a single screenshot, no video, no sound, taken from the porch camera the moment she was sitting there, clutching her shoes, mascara streaked down her cheeks, the Galliano dress slipping from one shoulder like a fallen curtain. I sent it, without comment, to Lisa, knowing full well that Lisa couldn't keep a lid on boiling water, let alone a piece of gossip that visually implied scandal, heartbreak, and a ruined friendship in one elegant composition. It was bait dressed up as concern, and I knew she'd take it. Within 2 days, the ripple had begun. Not a wave yet, but soft little whispers passed between cousins, subtle shifts in conversation during family Zoom calls, people suddenly pausing before mentioning Tessa's name like it might be radioactive. And then, just as I'd hoped, someone posted the image in a private Facebook group. A community of extended family, old high school friends, and bored women from our hometown who thrived on half-truths and perfectly framed moral dilemmas. The caption was just vague enough to be explosive. Funny how some people cry after dates these days. Wonder what happened here. The comments poured in, each one a needle. Some were sympathetic. Poor thing, she looks heartbroken. While others were sharper. That's Alyssa's porch, isn't it? And wasn't she supposed to be with some guy that night? Heard it didn't end well. But the real damage wasn't in the content. It was in the tone. The sudden shift from admiration to scrutiny, from envy to curiosity. The way people who once worshipped her filtered Instagram life now started looking for the holes, questioning the narrative, wondering what else had been fake. Tessa tried to do damage control the way she always did. Cryptic posts about betrayal and people who pretend to be family, tearful stories with music overlays, and grainy filters. A carefully curated silence about the man at the center of it all. But silence doesn't work when the room is already echoing. And when someone commented under one of her pouty selfies, "Is that the same dress you borrowed from Alyssa?" The likes on that comment outnumbered the ones on the actual photo. She deleted the post, then the next, then the whole account. Aunt Jean called me the next day. I let it ring, then she called again and again. Eventually I picked up, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted her to hear what composure sounded like in the voice of someone she once called too sensitive. She didn't yell, not at first. She started with polite fury, the kind that always sounds like customer service rage, asking how I could hurt family this way, and embarrass Tessa when she's clearly going through something. I let her finish, let the silence stretch out long enough to make her uncomfortable, and then I said, "She embarrassed herself. I just stopped pretending it didn't matter." The next morning, a package arrived. No return address, just a white box with my name written in handwriting that had once scrawled love notes on the fridge during sleepovers, and now carried the weight of consequence. Inside was the dress, professionally cleaned, repaired, restored to something that looked close to its former glory, though no amount of stitching could undo what had been done to it in spirit. Beneath it was a card, simple, handwritten, just 5 words. You win, but not really. No signature, no explanation, just the kind of sentence that wraps itself around your spine and stays there, reminding you that even victories come with shadows. I held the dress in my hands, not with reverence anymore, but with understanding. It wasn't just silken structure, it was a symbol now of what people will do when they think you won't fight back, of how silence isn't always weakness, and how truth, when timed correctly, can burn more deeply than any public explosion. And still, somewhere inside me, something remained unsettled. Because the footage, damning as it was, hadn't captured everything. There was a 5-minute gap, a glitch, a power flicker, something I hadn't noticed until I rewatched it days later, after the dust had mostly settled and Tessa had disappeared from the digital stage she once owned. In that gap, those missing minutes, was the space between Tom leaving and Tessa crying, and I'd never see it, never hear what was said, never know what passed between them that unraveled her so completely. Maybe she'd begged him to stay. Maybe he'd said something cruel. Maybe she saw something on his phone. Or maybe she just saw herself reflected in the glass of the door, wearing someone else's dress and someone else's shame. I'll never know. And maybe that's the real ending. Not in the revenge, not in the fallout, not even in the silence that followed, but in the mystery that remains. In the truth she left behind, carefully buried in 5 missing minutes I can't recover. But I still have the footage. I still have the dress. And I still have the knowledge that when it mattered, I chose clarity over chaos, calculation over confrontation. She borrowed something beautiful, and she returned it broken, but I made sure she never forgot the price.